Hello, welcome to my channel. As ever, I am here to read you. My name's Gavin Boyter. Let's start with the simple things. And I'm here to read you a 1,000 word, actually, that's not true. I'm here to read you a slightly longer story than usual, but it is based, as ever, on 5 random words, and these words will appear on your screen now. And as ever, whatever words the random word generator throws up, I have to use. So, without further ado, this is story number 74, Far from the Beaufort Sea. Security guard at the zoo is a job title that sounds like the punchline to a joke. Given the kinds of anecdotes Ian Clemmer had at his disposal, that wasn't far from the truth. Take last weekend, for instance. Ian and 2 of his colleagues had been called to eject a naked young man who had climbed into the sea lion enclosure on a dare. He tried to tell the arsehole, who was busy being feted by his companions, even as he struggled to put his clothes back on and shivered uncontrollably, that sea lions are hugely dangerous. Adult males can weigh up to 1,100 kilos and have been known to attack humans who stray too far into their domain. The idiot, apparently on a stag weekend, had been unimpressed. Ian realised he was only fueling the young man's notoriety, so he took his photo and added it to the virtual wall of shame denoting lifetime bans. Then there was the time a woman strayed too close to the fence of the lion enclosure, leaning back against the diamond-patterned mesh to take yet another selfie. Her long flowing blonde hair may, Ian surmised, have been mistaken for the mane of a rival male. Whatever had been the case, the king of their jungle, dubbed Hercules, had launched himself at the woman and swiped a full clawful of her hair out from the roots. The victim's screams had caused panic in the aviary on the other side of the park. Ian could only imagine what her selfie looked like. Today's anecdote in waiting had left Ian shaken to the core and quite possibly would end his career. As a 14-stone, 6'2" former Marine and Afghan veteran, Ian didn't scare easily, but today's calamity had been a misadventure too far. For weeks, the same kid had turned up at the zoo, having evidently been bought an annual pass by a well-meaning teacher. He had the wan expression, long jet-black hair and full military fatigues of the kind of young person Ian instinctively despised. And yet Ian had grown to warm to this strange figure, permanently listening to angry-sounding metal music through wireless earphones as he haunted the primate zone or sat sunken-eyed in the reptile house. Their first encounter had not been a promising one. Ian had tapped the boy on the shoulder, since he'd failed to hear Ian's throat clearing. The young man whipped round as if electrically shocked. Sorry? Said the boy, wiping something away from his eyes. Surely not tears. I said, would you turn the music down? You'll scare the snakes. Aren't they, like, behind an inch of plate glass? The kid suggested, before doing as he was told. Ian was gratified to note that from then on, the boy had his music loud when outdoors, but took it down a notch or two whenever he went in to look at the reptiles, scorpions, or giant crabs. The kid, who he named Overkill after the t-shirt he frequently wore under his ripped and patched field jacket, was always alone and looked habitually depressed. One Sunday afternoon, while doing a round in his electric buggy, Ian saw Overkill by the polar bear enclosure. The steep-sided pit contained a deep pool of chilled water, and artificial snow was regularly blasted in from overhead pipes. Sometimes, when the sole adult male resident was fed, live fish were released under the water so that Ernie could do his thing, in part for the crowds, mostly to give him some semblance of normality. Ernie being the name of the polar bear. It didn't work. Although the keeper had told Ian that the animal was much better off safe and well looked after in the zoo than facing environmental destruction, trophy hunters and starvation in the Arctic, Ian wasn't so sure he believed his own shtick. Ernie was doing his dance, as the little kids often called it. The bear was shuffling in a semicircle around the top of the faux iceberg, then doubling back on himself and returning to his starting point before repeating the moves. It looked like he was caught in a tedious loop of time. Ernie would sometimes do this for up to 90 minutes a day, generally before his daily feed. Ian couldn't help but admit that Ernie looked miserable when he wasn't tearing into prepared slices of seal or hunting trout. Overkill was on tiptoes, peering over the wall, staring at Ernie as he paced his imaginary cell. Ian stopped the buggy behind the kid, presuming the near-silent engine wouldn't draw attention to him. "He's depressed," said the kid without turning. Overkill's hearing evidently hadn't yet been impaired by all the insane screaming he listened to for pleasure. Ian jumped down from the buggy and strolled over. "Keeper says he's just exercising. Polar bears travel up to 30 kilometres a day normally." Overkill snorted. "Then why doesn't he walk around the main bit? There's more room." Ian had to admit the kid had a point. Overkill returned his gaze to the loping off-white beast. "I'll bet he's lonely. Plus he remembers when he had thousands of miles of wilderness to explore. Now he just has fiberglass and fake snow." Ian felt he should leave the kid to his depressive musings, but something troubled him and made him linger. The keepers tried to introduce a mate a couple of years ago. He attacked her, bit her in the neck. Kids were screaming. It was a scene. They had to take him down with 4 darts. When he started the story, Ian had thought he was telling a joke, yet somehow it had come out as a depressing memory of failure. He should be getting on. Hanging around Overkill would make anyone miserable. "He does look lonely," was all the kid said as Ian got back into his cart and drove off around the enclosure wall, past a wall of pampas grass, in the direction of the giraffes. He only got a few hundred yards along the main path when he heard screams and cries from behind him. Ian pulled a U-turn over the lawn and raced back to the polar enclosure. He half expected what he saw. Overkill had evidently jumped the wall and slid down the side of the tank. "Another swimmer," thought Ian, although this time clothed. "Hey, stay where you are! Stay very still!" 20 or so people were craning over the lip of the enclosure, trying to see the kid, who was now breaststroking out across the dark water towards Ernie's iceberg. There were indentations built into its side so the keepers could climb it and hose the top down while their charge was safely caged. Overkill was making straight for that ladder. "Do not go near him! Come back this way and grab the rope!" Ian uncoiled the rope ladder he kept in the back of the buggy for just this reason, and tossed it over the wall, after clearing away the spectators with an angry sweep of his muscular arms. Overkill ignored him, of course. He was a young man with a mission, evidently a suicide one. While everybody gawped and Ian radioed for assistance, Overkill now began to climb the berg. Ian remembered he'd not packed the dart gun today. He only took it when he was helping one of the keepers, or in case of emergency, like this. Shit. Ernie hadn't seemingly noticed Overkill at all so far. This changed when the boy poked his dripping head over the edge of the berg. Ernie stopped in his tracks, giving a low warning growl. Water pouring off him, Overkill climbed up onto the stained white fiberglass. The kid looked strangely calm, which worried Ian, who was still shouting almost incoherent instructions that Overkill was roundly ignoring. "Stay away from him! He'll attack!" Overkill sank to his knees, eyes closed, arms out as if inviting an embrace. The kid's insane, Ian thought. Then something remarkable happened. Ernie closed his mouth, loped over towards the boy and sniffed his hair. He even licked the kid's face with his huge pink sandpaper tongue. Surely Overkill would bolt. He didn't. Instead, he put his arms around the bear's neck and hugged him. It would have been a touching sight had it held for more than a few seconds, and had it not involved a 450-kilo polar bear. It might have made another amusing anecdote if the kid had just jumped off the berg into the water and swum to safety. But he didn't, and now Ernie pulled away, reared back, roared, and swiped the boy with one huge claw across the back and shoulders, cuffing him off the concrete and fiberglass berg like a straw doll. Overkill's body spun and flailed down into the icy water. All hell broke loose, screaming, terrified shouts. Ian had to pull back 2 men who were about to jump into the enclosure to rescue Overkill, who floated face down in the water, his back horribly torn. Moments later, dart guns blasted out, and a second body slumped from the berg into the oily, dark, fake ocean. To their credit, Ian and his colleagues had the boy out within minutes. As soon as Ernie fell, Ian jumped in, followed by 3 others. Overkill was still breathing, although he was barely conscious and badly injured. They carried him into the veterinary suite and called the paramedics. Overkill would probably live, and he'd have some fearsome scars to remember his misadventure by. Ian was baffled as he thought about it in the car home that evening. Why had the kid done it? He supposed he had to take Overkill at his word. Before the morphine silenced him, The boy had been muttering deliriously, saying something over and over. 8 barely audible words that Ian only figured out later. He looked like he just needed a hug. The end. So there you go. That's my little story of misadventure at the zoo. That's actually in part based on a true memory I have of going to the zoo when I was a kid and seeing a polar bear doing exactly that, just basically wandering back and forth in this kind of depressing little semicircle, not looking at all happy, not looking just looking horribly depressed. That was my reading of the scenario. So just using that memory to conjure something up here. Anyway, I hope you liked it, and if you did, I would love it if you would share the page, because that's the main way of growing it, is to share it amongst your friends, social media. You can also subscribe if you aren't already, and like it, and maybe watch another one. And I thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.